Welcome back, learners! I am very excited to bring you today's lesson. So, set your mind, ready your heart, and brace yourselves, for we will take a journey to discover the Week 3 of 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. For today's lesson, we will focus on the representative texts and authors from each region, the study and appreciation of a literary text from Luzon. Most essential learning competency in focus: writing a close analysis and critical interpretation of a literary text and doing an adaptation of these require from the learner the ability to identify representative texts and authors from each region. At the end of this module, you should be able to know and understand the use of imagery in poetry and appreciate and understand the use of imagery in the development of meaning in a poem from Luzon. Imagery: language that appeals to a reader's senses: sight, smell, sound, touch, and taste. There are commonly 5 types of imagery in poetry, but Masterclass adds 2 more types, namely kinesthetic imagery and organic imagery. Visual imagery appeals to the reader's sense of sight by describing something that the speaker of the poem sees. It may include colors, brightness, shapes, sizes, and patterns. Poets often use metaphor, simile, or personification to provide readers with visual imagery. Auditory imagery appeals to the reader's sense of hearing or sound. The poet may use sound devices like onomatopoeia. It may be a pleasing sound or a kind of noise. Gustatory imagery appeals to the reader's sense of taste. It may include sweetness, sourness, saltiness, savoriness, or spiciness. Tactile imagery appeals to the reader's sense of touch. It may include the feel of temperatures, textures, and other physical sensations. Olfactory imagery appeals to the reader's sense of smell. It may include pleasant fragrances or foul odors. Kinesthetic imagery appeals to the reader's sense of motion. It may include the sensation of being in a fast vehicle or the feeling of a bumpy ride. Organic imagery communicates internal sensations like fatigue, hunger, or thirst, and internal emotions such as fear, love, and despair. Sample illustration. Here is an example of how adding imagery enhances the text. Original sentence: She drank water on a hot day. With the imagery, the cool, refreshing water quenched her thirst as the scorching sun radiated on her.
Here are examples of the types of imagery in texts. There are commonly 5 types of imagery in poetry, but Masterclass adds 2 more types, namely, kinesthetic imagery and organic imagery.
Example of visual imagery. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. I wandered lonely as a cloud. By William Wordsworth.
Example of auditory imagery. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sounds the sweep of easy wind and downy flake, stopping by woods on a snowy evening. By Robert Frost.
Example of gustatory imagery. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me. They were delicious. So sweet. And so cold. This is just to say by William Carlos Williams.
Example of tactile imagery. There were 10,000 fruit to touch. Cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. After apple picking by Robert Frost.
Example of olfactory imagery. The old strange fragrance filled the air. A fragrance like the garden pink, but tinged with vague medicinal stink. Of camphor, soap, new sponges, blend with chloroform and violent scent. Miss Thompson Goes Shopping by Martin Armstrong.
Example of kinesthetic imagery. 10,000 I saw at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. I wandered lonely as a cloud by William Wordsworth.
Example of organic imagery. So I was once myself a swinger of birches, and so I dream of going back to be. It's when I'm wary of considerations, and life is too much like a pathless wood. Birches by Robert Frost.
Cirilo F. Bautista's Third World Geography is rich with imagery, which makes us vividly imagine the scenes in the poem. Open your senses while listening and observe the images in the poem.
Third World Geography by Cirilo F. Bautista. A country without miracles sits heavy on the map, thinking of banana trees rotting in the sunlight. The man who watches over it has commandeered all hopes, placed them in a sack, and tied its loose end. He goes around carrying it on his back. When asked what is inside, he say, just a handful of feathers. Just a handful of feathers. That's how light the burden of government is in peacetime. Any tyrant can turn it into a metaphor. You kneel on the parched earth and pray for rice, only the wind hears your useless words. The country without miracles tries to get up from the page, but the bold ink and sharp colors hold it down. Let us now dissect the meaning of the poem through its images. A country without miracles sits heavy on the map. This line is visual imagery. A country without miracles looks like a hopeless country. It sits heavy on the map because it is too hopeless to stand. Banana trees rotting in the sunlight. This line is a visual imagery. The bananas could symbolize a country's citizens who work hard under the heat of the sun. It is also worth noting that Banana Republic is any small country in the tropics South and Central America whose economies are largely dependent on fruit exports like bananas. Cambridge Dictionary defines it as a country that is poor, corrupt, and badly ruled. In analyzing a poem, it is also important to do a research on the context of the poem. Has commandeered all hopes, placed them in a sack, and tied its loose end. This line is a visual imagery or tactile imagery. The man who watches over the country placed all its hopes in a sack. The leader kept and tied the hopes which could have made the country progress.
He goes around carrying it on his back. This line is visual imagery or tactile imagery or kinesthetic imagery. The leader kept carrying the sack of hope yet keeping it tied. He never gave people hope, just a handful of feathers. This line is a visual imagery and tactile imagery. The leader compared the sack of hope to a handful of feathers. He let others see the problem as something light, something not burdensome and is easy to carry. You kneel on the parched earth and pray for rice. This line is visual imagery and tactile imagery. Parched earth signifies hunger. It must also be noted that when you kneel on dry earth, it hurts, only the wind hears your useless words. This line is an auditory imagery. Your prayers or cries for help fall on deaf ears. Nobody listens. The country without miracles tries to get up from the page. This line is considered a kinesthetic imagery. The country tries to rise from its problems, but the bold ink and sharp colors hold it down. This line is considered a kinesthetic imagery. But the powerful ones stop the country from standing up.
To summarize, The poem represents the oppression that is experienced by the people in the hands of those in power.
Thank you for listening. I'm Teacher Arvin. Defying limits, upholding excellence, and reminding you to always bear the Tatak City High spirit.
Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next video lesson. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the bell button for more updates.